protestant, oui, Montréal. Avec les Anglais. So, in 1889, so we can go to the next one, a group of writers led by Louis Fréchette published a monthly review called Le Canada Artistique, which adopted the name Canada Review 1 year later. This review was secular in spirit and often published articles attacking the poor quality of education provided by the clergy in the education system that it controlled. For example, it produced an article on the subject of secular education and religious education. It demonstrated with facts, that article demonstrated with facts to support its argument that religious education was far from being a guarantee of good moral conduct in view of the large number of crimes and abuses committed by priests in France and French Canada. Louis Fréchette, who was a well-known poet and at one time a Liberal member of Parliament in Ottawa, but he did only one term because the clergy was against it for the election that followed, so he lost. But Fréchette always joyfully attacked the superstition and ignorance spread by the clergy, particularly in sarcastic open letters, which he published in newspapers of the time, in addition to in the Canada Review. His incisive and caustic vigor was a genuine terror for the clergy. And if you read those letters, you'll understand why. Because they feared Fréchette's skill in exposing the ridiculous nature of the dismal education it imposed on French-Canadian youth. So, next image. So, I guess you all know that guy. So, in 1896, Wilfrid Laurier, he was young there, a former member of the Canadian Institute, was elected Prime Minister of Canada, triggering a new confrontation between church and state, at least in Quebec. Because shortly before the election, Laurier, as leader of the Liberal Party, clarified his views on religion in the following terms, and I quote, "For as long as I shall hold the seat in this House, the Parliament, each time it is my duty to take a position on any matter whatever, I will do so not from the standpoint of Catholicism, nor from that of Protestantism, but I will do so for reasons that concern all men who love justice, liberty, and tolerance." End of quote. Bishop Laflèche of Trois-Rivières, another historical obscurantist, hysterically condemned the position taken by Laurier, who, in his view, was, and I quote, "the affirmation of the liberalism condemned by the Church." End of quote. He added that a Catholic, for fear of committing a serious sin, should not vote for a party leader who so publicly asserted such heresy. However, it must be believed that many Quebec voters chose eternal damnation in the election, since they voted in 49 Liberals members and only 16 Conservatives. The Liberal Party triumphed, so we can move to the next image. The Liberal, oh no, so that was Monseigneur Laflèche, I forgot that I had one, yeah. So, because of him, Laurier won, I guess. Okay, Félix Gabriel Marchand, okay. The Liberal Party triumphed once again the year after, this time in the provincial election, because this man, Félix Gabriel Marchand, was elected Premier of the province and immediately introduced a bill to create a Ministry of Education. The clergy fiercely opposed the plan. In November 1897, the Archbishop of Montreal, Paul Bruchesi, informed the premier that none other than the Pope in person was asking him to abandon his plan. 2 months later, the Archbishop of Montreal and the one of Quebec City and Ottawa sent a letter to Premier Marchand calling for the withdrawal of the bill, which, in their view, casts a dark veil over our future. Marchand refused to yield, but ultimately he failed because, although the Liberals held the majority in the elected Legislative Assembly, that was not the case in the Legislative Council, which consisted of unelected and appointed members. Thus, a year later, the Legislative Councillors rejected the bill by 13 votes to 9. So the Church was thus able to extend its absolute control over education in French-Canadian society. Some years later, in 1902, the League for the Advancement of Education was founded. One of its senior leaders was Godefroy Langlois. This man, a great man. A director of the newspaper Le Canada. Langlois was an active member of the highly progressive and pro-secular Masonic lodge, l'Émancipation. In addition to being a liberal member of the Legislative Assembly, although the leaders of his own party greatly feared his vehement anti-clericalism. The League called for greater hygiene in the schools, better pay for teachers, and free standardized textbooks. It very soon took the further step of calling for mandatory education. In the obscurantist newspaper La Vérité, the reactionary journalist Jules Paul Tardiville, a real idiot by the way, read his articles, even for the time, it's just incredible how stupid that man was. So Tardiville immediately denounced the 3-point thrust he had perceived in the League's agenda: free, mandatory, and secular. The Bishop of Montreal made every effort in his power to persecute the League, but Godefroy Langlois was never afraid to defy him publicly, stating that the bishop will never dictate our conduct. However, as a result of the submission to the Church of the public and most of the intellectual and political elites, the bishop was successful in destroying the League. Langlois, having become a persona non grata in his own community, was forced into exile in France, where he died in 1928, so another one. There will be another one. The clerical ideology in the period between the two wars tended toward a chauvinistic, fascistic, and corporatist nationalism. That phenomenon was amplified by the economic crisis of 1929 and by the rise of fascism in Europe, where authoritarian regimes were viewed by most of the intellectual elites in Quebec at the time, including the newspaper Le Devoir, as an example worth following in order to restore order in society. Lionel Groux, this nice man, Lionel Groux, a priest and principal founder of the Quebec nationalist ideology as it appeared in the 20th century, advocated not only fascism, but also a French-Canadian racial cult that bordered on racism and anti-Semitism. His influence on the elites of the time was decisive. In those circumstances, however, so we can move to the next. Yeah, that's much better. In those circumstances, however, Jean-Charles Harvey, to whose memory I especially want to pay tribute today, because this year is the 40th anniversary of his death. That man was clearly an exception. In 1934, he published a novel called Les Demi-Civilisés.